We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 11b. The Gemara is explaining the difference between the Reisha of the Mishnah and the Seif of the Mishnah. In the Reisha of the Mishnah, the case was a person says he's going to be a Nazir, but only from one of the prohibitions of Nazirus. And in that case, Rabbi Shimon says mutter, he's not a Nazir, because the person's not a Nazir according to Rabbi Shimon until he says he's a Nazir from everything. Otherwise, he's not a Nazir at all. The Rabbanan say no, he's a full-fledged Nazir, because even if the person says he's a Nazir from one of the prohibitions of Nazirus, the person is a full-fledged Nazir. The problem is in the Seif of the Mishnah, it seems to have a very similar case. The person says, I understood that a Nazir is prohibited in wine, but I thought wine would be mutter for me because I can't live without wine. Or let's say the person says, I understood that a Nazir is not allowed to be Tamei Meis, but I'm involved in burying the dead, and therefore I thought that would not be prohibited for me. And in that case, Rabbi Shimon says exactly the opposite of what he says in the Reish of the Mishnah. It's Rabbi Shimon who's the one that says that he's prohibited in that case. And so the Gemara is trying to explain the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa, and the Gemara explains as follows. Reisha could go into Nazar Mechada. In the Reisha, the case is, as we said, he made a Nazirus, but he only identified one prohibition that he wants to take upon himself. According to the Rabbanan who say that even if a person takes a Nazir only from one prohibition, that person is a Nazir v'asr, so then he's asr. And the Rabbi Shimon damar yazer mikulam mutter. According to Rabbi Shimon, he holds in general the person needs to take a Nazirus from everything, otherwise it's not a Nazirus. And therefore in the Reish of the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon says mutter. Seifa, now the end of the Mishnah is the following case. The Nadar Mikulu, in his original Neder, he actually takes upon himself all of the prohibitions. So he most certainly became a Nazir at the outset. Ve'iz shel mechada, but then what happened was, he asked to undo it, he went to the Chachamim to undo the Nazirus, but he only asked in terms of one of the prohibitions. So the Rabbanan de Amri afilu lo Nazir ela me'achas me'en have a Nazir. According to the Rabbanan who say that when a person makes the Nazirus initially, even if he only identifies one prohibition, he's still a Nazir. So ki mizshal mechada minayu ishtri. The same would be true in the reverse. If the person asks to undo the Nazirus, but he only refers to one of the prohibitions, it becomes permitted. There is no Nazirus. That's why the Rabbanan in the Seif of the Mishnah are lenient. And the Rabbi Shimon D'Amar, and according to Rabbi Shimon who says, Achi Yazer Mikulam, that he's not a Nazir until he takes the Nazirus from everything, so it works in reverse as well. Ki Mishal Nami, when he asks to undo the Nazirus, Me'ahu ad Mishal Mikulu. So if he only asks from one of them, he actually has to ask from the entire thing. Mishum hachi katani v'Rabbi Shimon Oser. That's why it says there in the Seif of the Mishnah, when the person only asked to undo one part of the Nazirus, that's not going to be good. Just like if he would only take upon himself one part of the Nazirus, it wouldn't be good. And so therefore the She'el is no good. And that's why Rabbi Shimon Oser, Rabbi Shimon says it's prohibited. He remains a Nazir. And the Gemara offers another answer for the Seifa of the Mishnah. V'Iba Yisem, if you want, I could say another answer. Benidrei onsen kamiflagi. They're actually arguing in the Seifa of the Mishnah about a neder in a situation of onus. This is considered a situation of onus because he's saying it's impossible for him to observe this part of the Nazirus. He's not able to abstain from wine, or he's not able to abstain from becoming tamei, to refrain from becoming tamei meis. And there's a machlokus about nidrei onsen. Uvipluksa to Shmuel Ravasi. The machlokas at the end of the Mishnah between the Tanakam and Rabbi Shimon is the same machlokas we find between Shmuel and Ravasi. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Arba Nedarim Hitiru Chachamim. There are 4 Nedarim that the Chacham say are mutter. They're not really considered a neder, and they are as follows: Nidrei Zeruzin. Let's say you have a neder. The neder was made in order to encourage doing something, or Nidrei Havoy. The neder was made dependent on something that's totally exaggerated, impossible. Nidrei Shgagos. Let's say you have a situation of a neder that's made but unintentionally, and nidrei onsen, let's say you have a situation of a neder that involves something it's coerced, it's against the person's will, and so in all of those cases the Mishnah says it's not a neder. And there's a machlokas amoraim. What does it mean that it's not a neder? V'yomer Rav Yehuda Rav Yehuda says that Ravasi says Arba nedarim halalu. These 4 nedarim tzrichen she'ela lechachamim. They're not undone automatically. You have to ask the chachamim to undo the neder. Ki amrisa kamei de Shmuel. But when I said this in front of Shmuel, this is Rav Yehuda talking. First Rav Yehuda quotes Ravasi, and then Rav Yehuda says, when I said this in front of Shmuel, Amar li, so he said to me, Tana katani hitiru chachamim. The Tana says that it's totally mutter from the chachamim. V'yata amrit tzrichen she'ela lechachamim. And you're saying that you need to ask the chacham. You don't need to do anything. It's automatically not a neder. And so the Gemara now explains, Rabbanan Savri K'Shmuel. The Rabbanan hold like Shmuel. That's why they say in the Mishnah, this is in the category of a neder of onus. It's not a neder at all. It's totally mutter. Rabbi Shimon Karavasi, but Rav Shimon, he holds like Ravasi, meaning he holds it requires she'ela l'chachamim, and without asking the chacham to undo the neder, it is going to be a neder. It will be a nazirus, and that's why Rabbi Shimon says the person is a nazir. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hareini Nazir. Let's say a person says, I am a Nazir. V'yalai legaleach Nazir. And it's also upon me to shave another Nazir. What that means is the person is saying, I'm going to be responsible. I will bring the karbanos on behalf of another Nazir. When that Nazir finishes his term and he shaves, I'll bring the karbanos on his behalf. V'shama chaveru, let's say his friend hears him say this. V'yamar, and then the friend says, Va'ani v'alai legaleach Nazir. Same thing for me. I also am going to be a Nazir, and I'm also taking upon myself to shave on behalf of another Nazir, meaning to bring the karbanos on behalf of another Nazir. So the Mishnah comments, how you pick him if these two individuals are smart, megalchin zeh ezeh. So then they should bring on behalf of each other. Each one will bring the karbanos of the other, and that can minimize their expense. Now they only need to bring one set of karbanos each. But if they're not smart, megalchin nazirim acher. Not only do they have to bring their own karbanos, they're also going to have to bring the karbanos on behalf. Each one will have to bring on behalf of another Nazir. And the Gemara says, they had the following question. Shama chaveiro v'amar va'ani. Let's say his friend hears what he says. In other words, the person says, I'm a Nazir, and I'm also going to shave another Nazir, meaning I'll bring the karbanos of another Nazir. And then the person who heard just said the word va'ani, I as well. So mahu, what would be the halacha in that case? Va'ani akule dibura mashma. Is the va'ani going on the entire statement, meaning this second individual is taking upon himself nazirus and also taking upon himself the karbanos of another nazir? Odilma, or maybe apalge de dibura mashma. Maybe it's only going on half of the statement. He's only taking upon himself to be a nazir, or he's only taking upon himself to bring karbanos on behalf of another nazir. So what is the intention of the va'ani? And the Gemara says further, Im timsa lomar apalge de dibura mashma. If you're going to say that the va'ani is only going on half of the statement, we don't know which half of the statement. Aresha o aseifa, is it going on the first part of the statement? The second individual is saying, I will be a nazir. Or is it going on the second part of the statement? The second individual is saying that I will bring karbanos on behalf of a different nazir. And the Gemara says, Tashma, come and hear a proof from our Mishnah. Va'ani v'alai legaleach nazir. It says that the second person said, and me, and also it's upon me to bring the karbanos of another nazir, to shave another nazir. So it said, hayupichim megalchim zeh. If they're smart, they'll shave for one another, meaning to say, again, they'll bring the karbanos for one another. So in our Mishnah, the second person clearly says, both va'ani, and also va'alai legaleach. And so the Gemara says, Miduka'amar va'ani v'alai. From the fact that in the Mishnah the person had to say clearly, and I, and it is upon me to shave another nazir, Shma mina va'ani apalge de dibura. You see that the va'ani only goes on half the statement. And that's why he needs to say va'ani v'alai in order to go on the entire statement. And the Gemara says, Amri, they say, and yes, apalge de dibure mashma. Clearly you see from our Mishnah that the va'ani is only going on half the statement. Miu aresha o aseifa. But still, we are still asking, is it going on the first part or on the second part? On the second part of the statement, is it going on the becoming a nazir, or is it going on paying for the karbanos on behalf of another nazir? Or aseifa mina. So is it going again on the resh of the person's statement or the seif of the person's statement? And the Gemara says, we can learn that from the Mishnah also, because the Mishnah said that the person says, the second person says, va'ani va'alai legaleach. I, and it is upon me to bring the karbanos of another nazir. So you see clearly, Shema Mina, that you see from here, va'ani al tchilas dibura mashma, that the va'ani is going on the first part of the statement, meaning va'ani means I'm going to be a nazir. And then also, alai legaleach, I'll bring karbanos on behalf of another nazir. So the Gemara is saying we can see the answer directly from our Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua l'Rava. Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua says to Rava, Mimai dahachi, how do you know that you can make this inference from our Mishnah? Li'olam emelach, really I can tell you as follows. Va'ani akule de dibura. Really, when the person says v'ani, it's going on the entire statement. Just saying v'ani means that I am going to be a nazir, and also I'm going to pay for the karbanos of a different nazir. V'imishum v'alai. Now, if you're going to say, well, why does the person say v'alai? What is that adding? Maika Amar. What is that really saying? V'alai b'hamilsa. All he's saying is he's explaining what v'ani means. He means to say, when I say va'ani, v'alai, I mean to say that it's upon me also to bring karbanos on behalf of another nazir. In other words, it could be the va'alai is just explaining the first term, but really the va'ani alone is going on the entire statement. He's saying whatever you said, meaning both parts of what you said, that you're a nazir and that you're paying for someone else's karbanos, for a different nazir's karbanos, that too I'm taking upon me. And the Gemara brings a proof to this. Because if you don't say that, the Katani Seifa, look what is taught at the end of the Mishnah. At the end of the Mishnah it says as follows. Let's say a person takes a neder, he says, I am going to shave a half a nazir. He's only taking upon himself the karbanos halfway. V'shama chaver, and his friend hears, and in this case there's only one statement. Harei olai legalei chatzi nazir. There is no statement that I'm also a nazir. His friend hears, v'yamar va'ani olai legalei chatzi nazir, and he says, and it is upon me also to shave half a nazir. So over there, hasam mi'ika tartin mili, over there, are there even two things? There wasn't even two expressions over there. The first person simply said, Olai legalei chatzi nazir, and the second person said va'ani. So what's the olai legalei chatzi nazir there? Elamai ka'am, or rather, what's he saying? Olai b'hamilsa. He's just explaining. It is upon me in the following. When I said va'ani, here is what I meant. The olai is just explaining. So hachanami here also, ki ka'amar olai b'hamilsa. When he says olai, he's simply explaining the matter. It could be that the olai isn't adding the second part of the phrase. Really, the va'ani encompasses whatever the first nazir said. But the Gemara says, Amar le Rava. Rava says back to Rav Huna Brei Rav Yoshua, it can't be true what you're saying. Hachi ashta, what kind of comparison is this? Iyamr bishlama reisha tzricha. So if you're going to say that in the reisha it was necessary for the nazir, the second nazir, to make both statements. So seifa lo tzricha, and in the seifa it's not necessary to make both statements. Really, he could have just said viani, because there's only one statement there. But that would at least make sense. Tani seifa de lo tzricha mishum reisha de tzricha. The seifa where it's not needed to say both things, but we say both things anyway, just to keep it parallel in its language to the reisha. We find that by many mishnayos. You'll have the mishnah in the reisha. It says a certain style of language, a certain structure, and it says the same thing in the seifa. Even though the seifa it's not really necessary, but it keeps the language of the mishnayos parallel. So that would make sense according to me. In other words, in the Reisha, both statements really are needed because Va'ani is only going on the first part of the statement and the Va'ala is going on the second. But if you're going to say that the Reisha, it's not necessary to say Va'alai, and Seifa lo tzricha, and the Seifa, it's not necessary to say Va'alai. So Tani Reisha de lo tzricha, V'tani Seifa de lo tzricha, you're going to have extra phrase in the Reisha and in the Seifa. Both times they're not necessary. What would be the purpose of that? So that's why Rava argues clearly in the Reisha the Va'alai is needed because Va'ani is only going on the first part of the statement. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef says that Rav Yochanan says, Ha'omer l'shluch, if someone says to his agent, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph.